in the cloud.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so when we last left off, Hezekiah uh, was being a decent king down in Judah. Israel's already out in exile. Israel's out of the picture already, and his son Manasseh is going to take over as we begin here. And Manasseh, like Manasseh, hits an all-time low, which is really difficult to do. Of all these months of reading Kings, you realize how difficult that would be to do. Um, but he manages to do it. So let me share this real quick and talk. Let's see here. Well,
Second Kings
yeah,
20,
21 for Second
21.
King 21. So here, there we go. Here, I'm getting so good at that now. It's just popping up right away. Music. It's almost like the 14th or 15th time I do something, I learn how to do it right. All right, so let's see how far Manasseh can go. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites, which seems to be an expression that whoever took over the authorship of Second Kings used a lot here in the last few chapters. The detestable practices that had been followed by previous nations the Lord had driven out. It's like the fourth or fifth time I remember seeing that. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected altars to Baal and made an Asherah pole, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, in which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem I will put my name." In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced sorcery and divination, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eye of the Lord, provoking him to anger. It's basically a greatest hits package of everything he could do wrong. He took the carved Asherah pole he had made and put it in the temple of which the Lord had said to David and to his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelites wander from the land I gave their forefathers, if only they would be careful to do everything I commanded them and will keep the whole law that my servant Moses had gave them." So let's see. What was that quote from anyway? Uh, what does it say? Here, that's amazing. Um, but the people did not. Oh, sorry. Commanded them, but the people did not listen. Manasseh led them astray, so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. There's that again. The Lord said through his servants, the prophets, "Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these detestable sins. He has done more evil than the Amorites who preceded him, and has led Judah into sin with his idols. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: I am going to bring such disaster on Jerusalem and Judah, the ears of everyone who hears of it will tingle. I will stretch out over Jerusalem the measuring line used against Samaria and the plumb line used against the house of Ahab." Interesting, because those are both like building instruments. Here used as a destruction metaphor. "I will wipe out Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. I will forsake the remnant of my inheritance and hand them over to their enemies." Guess he's like, a remnant of my inheritance because Israel's already gone. So Judah would have been the remnant, right? Um, I keep losing my verse here. Remnant of inheritance and hand them over to their enemies. They will be looted and plundered by all their foes. 15. Because they have done evil in my eyes and have provoked me to anger from the day their forefathers came out of Egypt until this day. Moreover, Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem from end to end, besides the sin he had caused Judah to commit, so that they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. What exactly that means, I'm not quite sure, what innocent blood he was shedding. As for the other events of Manasseh's reign and all he did, including the sin he committed, they are written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah. He rested with his fathers, so he died a natural death. Um, and was buried in his palace garden, the garden of Uzzah. And Amon, his son, succeeded him as king. So Manasseh is going to take the blame for a lot of bad things that are going to come up here, but he doesn't actually have to deal with it. He dies a peaceful death. Amon was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. His mother's name was Meshullemeth, pretty name, daughter of Haraz. She was from Jatbah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. So there's another one. He walked in the ways of his father. He worshipped the idols his fathers worshipped, and he bowed down to them. He forsook the Lord, the God of his fathers, and did not walk in the ways of the Lord. Amon's officials, however, conspired against him and assassinated the king in his palace. That must not have been a popular rebellion, though, because then the people of the land killed all those who had plotted against King Amon, and they made Josiah, his son, king in his place. As for the other events, etc., etc., and Josiah, his son, succeeded him as king. So we get the last hero of kings now, Josiah, who has an interesting experience when seemingly God's law is rediscovered as if it was completely forgotten about. Wow. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king and reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adiah. She was from Baskath. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in all the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or to the left, which I think is also an expression used of, I can't remember, one of the few earlier kings that found favor in the eyes of the writers. In the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah sent the secretary, Shaphan, son of Azaliah, the son of Meshullam, to the temple of the Lord. And he said, that is, Josiah said, go up to Hilkiah, the high priest, and have him get ready the money that has been brought into the temple of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have collected from the people. Have them entrusted to the men appointed to supervise the work on the temple, and have these men pay the workers who repair the temples of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, and the masons. Also have them purchase timber and dressed stone to repair the temple. But they need not account for the money entrusted to them, because they are acting faithfully. So the same orders as the last king that restored the temple. Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, hey, look what I found, basically. Hey, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. He gave it to Shaphan, who read it. Verse 9. Then Shaphan the secretary went to the king and reported to him, your officials have paid out the money that was in the temple of the Lord and have entrusted it to the workers and supervisors of the temple. Oh, and by the way, verse 10, then Shaphan the secretary informed the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read from it in the presence of the king. Interestingly, that it sounds like Josiah was otherwise unfamiliar with this. When the king heard the words from the book of the law, he tore his robes. He gave these orders to Hilkiah the priest and several others. 13, go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah about what is written in this book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that burns against us because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written there concerning us. It's like, I just found the rule book, and it turns out we've been breaking them. Hilkiah the priest and the others went to speak to the prophetess Huldah, who was the wife of Shalem, son of Tikvah, the son of Harhes, the keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the 2nd district. I like that, little bit of autobiographical detail there, like in the house down the street, the second one on the right, purple awnings. She said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the man who sent you to me, this is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on this place and its people, according to everything written in the book the king of Judah has read. Because they have forsaken me and burned incense and other gods and provoked me to anger by all the idols their hands have made, my anger will burn against this place and will not be quenched. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of the Lord, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the words you heard. Because your heart was responsive, and you humbled yourself before the Lord when he heard what I have spoken against this place and its people, that they would become accursed and laid waste, and because you tore your robes and wept in my presence, I have heard you, declares the Lord. Therefore, I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be buried in peace. Your eyes will not see all the disaster I am going to bring on this place. So they took her answer back to the king. It's like in this. One second. It seems like this kind of pattern is repeated several times throughout First and Second Kings, and the Lord's answer is always, "Okay, I'll back off this time because you're doing this. Like, I'll give you another chance." This time it's too late. Like, I've made up my mind. It's going down, but because you're trying to do what's right, you'll get to rest your head without having to see it all happen to you or to them. And so Josiah, for the second time in the book of Kings, and for several times overall, renews the covenant.
And by tradition, this book they find is the book of Deuteronomy.
Right.
Yeah.
Parts of Deuteronomy, or at least,
And it is a kind of artful thing that it was found in the wall and therefore kind of given some sense of being rooted in more deeply in the tradition and not just something we wrote last Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing, yeah.
Indeed.
The interesting speculation that historians have about this is, was the book really found, or was it written at an appropriate time? Because it appears that perhaps from the language used, the book of Deuteronomy probably dates from the time of Josiah or shortly beforehand. So it may not have been a hidden secret book. It may have been a book that appeared mysteriously and fortuitously at the time that the temple authorities were beginning to assert some authority.
Well, it would be a big project. And you need political stability and military security. Back to Hezekiah, I guess that was a period of some safety. But it's interesting, Richard, you point out the language reflects, you think, the time of King Josiah.
Yeah. In fairness, I find books in my walls all the time. That's where half of my libraries come from, is I visit people and knock out their walls and take the books. So, and of course I keep half my library in scroll form because all right, let me get back to this here. So Josiah is going to renew the covenant. Well, he's going to give it a shot anyway. Let's see. There we go. All right, chapter 23. Then the king called together the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the men of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets, all the people from the least to the greatest. A little bit of hyperbole. I love it when all the people show up at a different time. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and keep his commands, regulations, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in this book. And all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. The king ordered Hilkiah the high priest, the priests next in rank, and the doorkeepers to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah and all the starry hosts. He burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron Valley and took the ashes to Bethel, which I don't think is symbolic of Bethel anyway. I think he's just dumping it over the border. He did away with the pagan priests appointed by the kings of Judah to burn incense on the high places of the towns of Judah and on those around Jerusalem. those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and the moon, to the constellations, and to all the starry hosts. He took the Asherah pole from the temple of the Lord to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned it there. Outside Jerusalem. I'm sorry. He burned it there. He ground it to powder and scattered the dust over the graves of the common people. Again, I assume and hope that that was a diss to the pole and not to the common people. He also tore down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes, which were in the temple of the Lord, and were, well, that's unfortunate, and where the women did weaving for Asherah. Josiah, but that really had gotten pretty bad when the when the quarters for the male shrine prostitutes were in the temple of the Lord. Wow. Josiah brought all the priests from the towns of Judah and desecrated the high places from Geba to Beersheba, so from north to south, where the priests had burned incense. He broke down the shrines at the gates, or broke out the high places at the gates, at the entrance to the gate of Joshua, the city governor, which is on the left of the city gate, somewhere, just so you know where to find it. Although the priests of the high places did not serve at the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, they ate unleavened bread with their fellow priests. He desecrated Topheth, which was in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire to Moloch. He removed from the entrance to the temple of the Lord the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun. They were in the court near the room of an official named Nathan Melech. Josiah then burned the chariots dedicated to the sun. I assume they just had symbols and such on them. He pulled down the altars the kings of Judah had erected on the roof near the upper room of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh had built in the two courts of the temple of the Lord. He removed them from there, smashed them to pieces, and threw the rubble into the Kidron Valley, which is basically his garbage can, the Kidron Valley. The king had desecrated the high places that were east of Jerusalem and the south of the hill of corruption. The one Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the vile goddess of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the vile god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of the people of Ammon. Josiah smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles and covered the sites with human bones, thus making them unusable for temple purposes. Huh. Even the altar at Bethel, the high place made by Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which had caused Israel to sin, even that altar and high place he demolished. And that's important, I think, in verse 15, because there were other kings, there's probably half a dozen now that we've read about, that went about getting rid of these things, right? And every time, it seems to me, I'm not going to go back and look, but every time it seems to me, there was always the caveat at the end, but the high places still, burned incense there, or those golden calves of Jeroboam were left intact. So he's serious. He's more serious, in fact, than anyone has been up to this point about this about getting rid of the foreign gods. He burned the high place and ground it to powder, and burned the Asherah pole also. Then 16. Then Josiah looked around, and when he saw the tombs that were there on the hillside, he had the bones removed from them and burned on the altar to defile it, in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by the man of God who foretold these things. That's a great, this is kind of like one of those HBO shows that goes on for 2 seasons, and in the last episode they refer back to a favorite character from somewhere in that first season. Because here comes the man of God from Judah's bones. The king asked, "What is that tombstone I see?" The men of the city said, "It marks the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and pronounced against the altar of Bethel the very things you have done to it." Do you guys remember hold on a second, so I can actually look at you. Do you guys remember the man of God from Judah from back in 1 Kings from back in the spring? The guy who never got named. He showed up. He's told to preach against this altar that Jeroboam is building, right? He does it. Jeroboam's seize him, and Jeroboam's hands shrivels up. And this is the strange story where he's going back to Judah, and another old prophet tricks him into having dinner with him, right? And and then he falls dead, but a lion doesn't eat his body. And that's the story of the man of God from Judah. And you think, well, that's an interesting episode. Well, here he is again, or his bones are anyway. Okay, cool. Okay. 18. Leave it alone, he said. Don't let anyone disturb his bones. So they spared his bones and those of the prophet who had come from Samaria, who I assume is the old prophet, because if I didn't go back and read it, but I remember that the old prophet who tricked him said to his sons, "Bury him in my tomb with me." All right. So I assume that's those two guys, and here we are, a lot of time later, and Josiah says, "Hey, leave them alone." 19. Just as he had done at Bethel, Josiah removed and defiled all the shrines at the high places the kings of Israel had built in the towns of Samaria that had provoked the Lord to anger. Josiah slaughtered all the priests of those high places on the altars and burned human bones on them. Then they went back to Jerusalem. So, it wasn't all just vandalism. 21. The king gave the order to all the people, celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as is written in this book of the covenant. Let's see if I can move this down real quick here. This book of the covenant. Not since the days of the judges who led Israel, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, had any such Passover been observed. But in the 18th year of the king Josiah, this Passover was celebrated to the Lord in Jerusalem. Furthermore, Josiah got rid of the mediums and spiritists, the household gods, the idols, and all the other detestable things seen in Judah and Jerusalem. This he did to fulfill the requirements of the law written in the book that Hilkiah the priest had discovered in the temple of the Lord. Neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him, who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul, with all his strength, in accordance with the law of Moses. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah because of all the sins that Manasseh had done to provoke him to anger. 27. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence, as I removed Israel. I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple, about which I said, there shall my name be. As for the other events, etc. 29. When Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, who's going to be a star here in the last couple of chapters, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the Euphrates River to help the king of Assyria, because Assyria was in trouble. King Josiah marched out to meet him in battle, but Necho faced him and killed him in Megiddo. Josiah's servants brought his body in a chariot from Megiddo to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz. We've already had Jehoahaz up in that line. Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in place of his father. So Josiah, like the last big hero, really, and perhaps the biggest. Let's knock off these other two kings real quick. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was this one, daughter of that one, and she was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. How does Josiah not make sure that this doesn't happen? It's like, look to your own house, bro. Anyway.
Teach their kids anything?
Just running wild. All right, so he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. 33. Pharaoh Necho put him in chains at Riblah in the land of Hamath, so that he might not reign in Jerusalem. He imposed on Judah a levy of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in place of his father Josiah, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz and carried him off to Egypt, and there he died. Jehoiakim paid Pharaoh Necho the silver and gold he demanded. In order to do so, he taxed the land and exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land according to their assessments. So he was in favor of the graduated income tax, graduated tax. All right, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Zebedah, daughter of Pedaiah. She was from Rumah, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. All right, so a double bummer to end a very long chapter with, after we got to know Josiah so well. Perfect. All right, well, you know where we're headed with this. We're headed to Babylon. And from what I read outside of this, I guess the Pharaoh was moving up to help the Assyrian king, because the Assyrian king would, a different king, but the Assyrians who had taken Israel and blotted them out were now in danger of being blotted out themselves by the Babylonians. The Babylonians are running over everybody now. So the Pharaoh's like trying to stop it, but then, I don't know exactly what Josiah's political motivation was to go out and fight the Pharaoh. Whatever it was, it didn't work. So, chapter 24, during Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, who I'm always going to think of as Mr. Gustafson now, king of Babylon, invaded the land, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. But then he changed his mind and rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord sent Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him. So everyone's teaming up. Of course, they're all vassals of the Babylonians too, but he sent them to destroy Judah in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by his servants and prophets. Surely, these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done, including the shedding of innocent blood. For he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. Interestingly, in Chronicles, which we've already sort of disparaged in here as unreliable, Manasseh has a change of heart at the end of his life and has a come to Jesus moment with Jesus' dad. But it's not recorded in Kings that way at all. In Kings, instead Manasseh gets all the blame basically for Israel. For Judah going into eventual captivity here. As for the other events of Jehoiakim's reign and all he did, they are written about. He rested with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, succeeded him as king. The king of Egypt did not march out from his own country again, because the king of Babylon had taken all his territory, from the Wadi of Egypt to the Euphrates River. So Babylon on the march. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was this one, she was daughter of that one, and she was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And Nebuchadnezzar himself came out. This is attested in the Babylonian records, by the way. They were good bookkeepers, and they kept their annals nice and clean with exactly what year was what. Nebuchadnezzar himself came out to the city where his officers were besieging it. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and his officials all surrendered to him. In the 8th year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he took Jehoiachin prisoner. As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed all the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace, and took away all the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. I'm surprised there's any of those left. They seem to have given those away a number of times. And carried into exile all Jerusalem, all the officers and fighting men, and all of the craftsmen and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin captive to Babylon. He also took from Jerusalem to Babylon the king's mother, his wives, his officials, and the leading men of the land. The king of Babylon also deported to Babylon the entire force of 7,000 fighting men, strong and fit for war, and 1,000 craftsmen and artisans. And he made Mattaniah, there we go, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as Jehoiakim had done. It was because of the Lord's anger all this happened to Jerusalem and Judah. In the end, he thrust them from his presence. Now Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. With what? The poorest? Because, he had to, I suppose, build himself back up again for those, 7 years? Did he get 7 years? 11 years. I mean, Jerusalem 11 years. So I guess he's trying to build himself back up again. He's got to be paying tribute constantly to stay in that position. All right, here we go. We've reached the end. Chapter 25. In the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, once again, Zedekiah is Jehoiachin's uncle, which seems to be about the same age as him. And then, so the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. Right? Remember, at the end there, Zedekiah rebelled against him. He encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden, though the Babylonians were surrounding the city. They fled toward the Arabah, but the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers were separated from him and scattered, and he was captured. He was taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where sentence was pronounced on him. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes and bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. There's an interesting note here. I gotta find it exactly here. Putting out his eyes. Oh, here we go. Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 12:13, had predicted that Zedekiah would be brought to Babylon, but that he would not see it. So that's Ezekiel's prediction. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Zebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Zebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace and those who had gone over to the king of Babylon. But the commander left behind some of the poorest people of the land to work the vineyards and fields. 13. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, and the bronze sea at the temple of the Lord, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. The commander of the imperial guard took away the censers and sprinkling bowls, all that were made of pure gold or silver. The bronze from the 2 pillars, the sea, and the movable stands, which Solomon had made for the temple of the Lord, was more than could be weighed. Each pillar was 27 feet high. The bronze capital on one of the pillars was 4.5 feet high and was decorated with a network and pomegranates of bronze all around. The other pillar, with its network, was similar. Second here. The commander of the guard took as prisoners Sariah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the priest next in rank, and the 3 doorkeepers. Of those still in the city, he took the officer in charge of the fighting men and 5 royal advisors. He also took the secretary, who was the chief officer in charge of conscripting the people of the land, and 60 of his men who were found in the city. Zebuzaradan, the commander, took them all and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. There at Riblah, in the land of Hamath, the king had them executed. So Judah went into captivity away from her land. And that gets its own paragraph in my Bible here. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, the son of son of that one, to be over the people he had left behind in Judah. 23. When all the army officers and their men heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah as governor, they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah. Ishmael, son of this one, Johanan, son of that one, Zariah, son of that one, and Jezaniah, son of Micah, and their men. 24. Gedaliah took an oath to reassure them and their men, do not be afraid of the Babylonian officials. Settle down in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will go well with you. So he was like, yeah, he was like William Howard Taft as the Philippine governor, right? He was settling down. In the seventh month, however, Ishmael, who was of royal blood, came with 10 men and assassinated Gedaliah, and also the men of Judah and the Babylonians who were with him at Mizpah. At this, all the people, from the least to the greatest, together with their army officers, fled to Egypt for fear of the Babylonians. In the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, he was king for what, like a week? He's been in exile a long time. King of Judah, in the year Evil-Merodach became king of Babylon, he released Jehoiachin from prison on the 27th day of the 12th month. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat of honor higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put aside his prison clothes and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. Day by day, the king gave Jehoiachin a regular allowance as long as he lived. And that's nice of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that's an optimistic note.
Like a house mascot or a pet.
Yeah. Well, he's got several because there's the other kings. He's eating better than the other kings that are hanging out there too. So he's got his king collection. The Babylonian king does.
Be interesting to be able to talk to them, I suppose.
Get
their advice.
Yeah, you got that that great question about who you would invite to your ultimate dinner party. Yeah. And he goes and collects interesting people from around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can I say, ladies and gentlemen? We've gotten both of Israel and Judah successfully into captivity.
Wow. Makes you thankful for the peaceful transfer of power. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe we don't have it so bad.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Indeed.
Although I can imagine all the for a lot of these transitions, probably a lot of the people in the country, it was almost irrelevant to them. I wonder how often it affects. I mean, when the armies come and take your family, divide them up and take you into slavery, that's one thing. Yeah. But a lot of the time it's just like, hey, did you hear what happened up at the castle?
That's a good how devout was the general population? In other words, we've had times in human history, but if you look at the Middle Ages, where the common population was pretty devout. Not so true today, that's for sure. But how devout was the common population? Do we have any knowledge of that?
Well, it seems that it seems to me that they were often as devout as the king commanded they be. Right?
Okay.
People are trying to scratch out a simple survival.
You had to be spending most of your time worrying about food and housing. And water.
I suppose, yeah. Well, there's that reference with King Josiah where they hadn't celebrated Passover in how many years?
In a while, at least according to the proper rules. There might have been other celebrations of Passover, but according to the proper rules of what the Levites should do and everything.
Well, and the temple being used for all kinds of other religious practices.
Yeah.
Not,
the temple seemed like a community center. It's like, anything was going on. Oh, I forgot to mention, there was an interesting text note during the chapter on Manasseh. It said that there is some sort of Jewish writing that during this time Isaiah was killed by being sawed in half. I had never heard that before, so I thought that was strange. But it said it was like that there was just this one claim in this one ancient text, and that it was otherwise unsubstantiated, for sure. But if Manasseh had Isaiah sawed in half, yeah, that would definitely, I think, make him the worst.
Yeah.
Or at least the worst since Ahab and Jezebel.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the question, Ken, you raised? Exactly what were you asking?
Well, I was wondering, the common populace, how devout were they? In other words, were they just sort of sitting off to the side and only the priests and the king were worried about religion here? Or was the common populace really involved?
I suspect not. I mean, my guess would be we're probably dealing with a 90-10 situation here, where 90% of the people did not care about what was going on in Jerusalem or the temple, and reverted to local traditions, which had to do with all these different gods. You probably had 10% who constituted both the political and the religious leadership, and of course they were the ones who got to write the story. Don't forget, Kings is not a popular history; it's a history of the elite, and seen from the perspective of a rather probably a minority within the minority. Because it seems very obvious that there were at least two parties going on at most of the. I mean, I don't mean joyous parties. I mean political parties going on within the country at this time, and the downfall. And we can go into this more when we talk about the exile, but the conflict, political conflict, was really between those who wanted to make peace with Babylon and those who were hoping against hope that an intervention by the Egyptians would destroy the Babylonians. And the Battle of Carchemish, which is during the period that we've been reading about. The Babylonians totally destroyed the Assyrians and the Egyptians. That was a major swing in power in the world at that point.
Yeah, the Assyrians haven't been the same since.
I'm sorry, Kevin?
I said, and the Assyrians haven't been the same since.
Yeah, I mean, the Assyria disappears from the books of history at that point.
Yeah. It's interesting, for sure.
Well, and isn't it true that First and Second Kings are sort of written with the viewpoint to persuade people that the reason that they were sent into exile was due to their lack of faith and
absolutely.
And it's explicit. It's the author takes time to not only make that explicit, but to that the portion there, I think in the chapter 23, somewhere in there, where he quotes God as saying this, and I had wanted Jerusalem to be, a light for my feet, and he's like, he throws it in there just to kind of pile on the guilt a little bit, right?
Well, I think we had that last week, right? When somewhere right after.
Yeah, the last 10 chapters are filled with that.
Yeah. But this was not written before it happened. It's written well after it happens. So
So I suspect that last chapter, or last two chapters, was probably written very, very close to the time that it happened. Yeah, that is probably a product of the 590s.
So, yeah, not long afterward that they started to try to find meaning in their desolation.
Right.
I tried to make sense out of the whole thing, that what happened.
Right, and it certainly makes sense that the Kings wouldn't be written in the order we're reading it necessarily. There's clearly multiple authors going on here, so why it's some parts of it might have been written much later than the ending. As they kind of reverse engineer some of the reason they're in exile.
Well, it's during this time that, as I understand it, some of the language or metaphors of God that had a feminine reference, feminine metaphors for God, get struck from the scripture. We kind of lose track of those things. And as part of this sort of purification project. And I think Jesus is kind of set against the backdrop of this, what's called the Deuteronomistic history. You do bad, God smites you, versus the suffering servant in Isaiah, or the language in many of the Psalms, or wisdom and Proverbs. Or even many of the prophets who do God's word and do God's will, but suffer for it, not because of God's punishment, but because of the response of the world. So it's a different, different cause and effect kind of thinking. But maybe it couldn't have emerged without this exile and this Deuteronomistic history.
Deuteronomistic is not a word you.
I can't say it well.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, it bumped me out of the seminary for sure.
Yeah. Sounds like your tuner's gotten to the very top of the piano there.
Yeah, I should.
Very good.
From having to listen to it, but then I can't participate. So.
No. I don't think it at all. Well, kids, that's kind of all I got.
All right.
And so, when are we meeting again?
Richard?
Richard, we pick it up next week.
Well, let me talk about that. I'm having demon problems with my. Actually, it's the forum computer. I can't get Zoom working on it, so I'm going to have to work on that. I should know in a day or two whether I can get that to work or not. If not, I'm thinking we might have to postpone next week's session until I can get that working. Because right now I can do, what I'm doing right now is I'm speaking through the phone and I can see all of you, but I don't think I can load any attachments at this point. So I need to get that straightened out. But the plan was I have a series of 4 lectures on the exile, and we would begin the first one of those if everything works out next week. The following week would look at the various approaches to how you deal with the history of the exile, looking particularly at the Deuteronomic history, which we've just studied for several weeks, and also the writings of the prophets. And that would continue into the 3rd week. And then the 4th week would be a look at the return from the exile, which turns out to be almost as messy as the exile itself.
How could it be any other way?
So that would take us up to about about the year 500 or so.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, I hope you get that worked out. It's
I
frustrating.
do too. I mean, I could do the lecture like this, but like I say, I wouldn't be able to do any visuals. And I did have a couple things I thought I should include, including a map and some timelines.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
let me see what I can do in the next couple of days, and I'll let all of you know.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Really
much.
great.
It's been a lot of fun.
And I appreciate you all joining me every week. I really do.
All right. Have a
Because
good.
I could talk to myself at any time, but it really, you guys really make it. It's like
Kevin, this is just a thought. I don't know if we want to do anything more before the holiday or before Christmas, but have you thought of maybe the two of us could do some things on the prophets?
I love the prophets. I'd love that idea.
Yeah, and I mean,